There are places where history lives quietly, not in textbooks, not in museums, but in the corners of forgotten hallways, between the footsteps of those too young to know what they're walking on. Naval Training Facility 42 was one of those places, modern, sleek, buzzing with youth and discipline, and in the heart of its west wing, mopping floors, scrubbing baseboards, always the first in and the last out, was an old man named Joe. No one knew his last name. No one asked. To most, he was just Old Joe the janitor, a slow-moving fixture with cloudy eyes and a hunched back, a whisper of something the base had forgotten to salute. It happened during morning drills. The recruits had finished their endurance run. Boots muddy, shirts soaked, pride high, and that's when Riley, the loudest of the new class, saw Joe quietly, wiping down the entrance steps with a handheld rag. "Hey, Sarge," Riley shouted mockingly, "don't miss a spot, or we'll dock your combat pay." Laughter broke across the group like shrapnel. Even the instructors didn't flinch. Joe didn't look up, didn't respond. He just kept wiping, slow, steady, silent. But one person noticed something odd, a glint of color on Joe's jacket sleeve, a flash of something that shouldn't be on a janitor's uniform. After chow, recruit Avery, the quietest in the group, doubled back to where Joe had been cleaning. He found the old man rinsing a mop near the supply shed, and on the left shoulder of his faded navy windbreaker was a patch, worn but unmistakable, a silver star ribbon. Avery blinked. Was it real? Was this some kind of recycled jacket? He didn't ask. He just watched. Joe caught his stare, then gave a small nod. "Don't believe everything they laugh at, son," he said softly, voice like gravel soaked in time. And then he walked away. That night, Avery searched the base records. Nothing on Joe. No janitor listed with veteran status. No awards tied to civilian staff. He asked one of the older tech sergeants. "That guy," the sergeant replied. "He's been here longer than the mess hall. Keeps to himself, quiet as a church bell. Some say he was special forces. Others say he just never left after Vietnam." Avery leaned back in his chair. His curiosity burned, but deeper than that was respect, because medals don't appear by accident, and legends don't always announce themselves. The next day, Avery returned to the archives. This time, he dug deeper, past the civilian contracts, past the maintenance, logs, and there it was, a folder marked Joseph M. Taylor, classified, retired 1982. He opened it slowly. Inside, one black and white photo, a younger Joe, eyes blazing, uniform crisp, kneeling beside a downed aircraft in the jungle, a wounded pilot slung over his back, blood on his hands, and on his chest, the very medal Riley had laughed at. Not just a silver star, but a Medal of Honor. Avery stared at the file long after the lights in the archive dimmed. He wasn't supposed to see it. The lock code had been defaulted, a relic of sloppy digital cleanup, but what he saw, he couldn't unsee. Joseph M. Taylor, Sergeant First Class, Reconnaissance and Recovery, Pacific Theater, Medal of Honor. 1971, the citation read, "For acts of valor under heavy fire, risking life to retrieve wounded personnel, refusing extraction until all were accounted for. Evacuated last, left behind nothing but footprints and blood." The next morning, Joe was back. Same routine, same silence. Pushing a mop cart past recruits half his age, invisible, Avery watched from the corner of the training yard, heart pounding with everything he now knew. He wanted to say something, anything. But how do you thank a ghost? He approached anyway. "Sir," he began. Joe stopped him with a glance. Not angry, not scared, just tired. "You saw the file." Avery blinked. "How?" "I used to fix comms," Joe said quietly. "I know when the silence changes." Joe leaned in, not to intimidate, to protect. "Don't tell them, not yet." "But," Avery began, "they don't listen to medals anymore." They listened to pain, and that I'm still carrying. Avery stepped back. The old man's eyes weren't clouded with age. They were focused, razor sharp beneath the dust. I clean floors now, because there's peace in cleaning what others leave behind. Then he walked away, mop squeaking, legacy trailing behind like a shadow no one saw. 2 days later, during PT review, Riley made another crack. You hear about old Joe? Bet he's been mopping since the Korean War. Probably thinks pine sol counts as combat experience. The group laughed again, but Avery didn't. He clenched his jaw. Not out of anger, out of grief. He wanted to speak, but Joe's words echoed back. They don't listen to medals anymore. They listen to pain. So Avery waited. That evening, Riley found himself on trash duty, alone, assigned to the West Wing for discipline adjustment. He rolled his eyes. Guess I'm shadowing the mop ghost. When he walked into the hangar's back corridor, he heard it. A heavy, gasping breath, a muffled groan, metal crashing, and then silence. Riley turned the corner and saw Joe collapsed beside the utility sink, his hand clutching his ribs, face pale and soaked in sweat. Without thinking, Riley dropped the bag, rushed to Joe's side and called base med. Man down, custodian. Code yellow. East corridor. The medics came fast, but Joe was unconscious before they arrived. His jacket slipped from his shoulder during the lift. That's when Riley saw it. A faded Medal of Honor, pins stitched beneath the lining. He didn't speak, didn't blink, because the man he had mocked for weeks had once saved lives while risking his own, and now he was fighting alone again. Joe was rushed to the infirmary. No sirens, no spotlight, just quiet urgency. The kind reserved for those who mattered more than anyone realized. Word spread quickly, not because of his condition, but because of what Riley had seen. The medal, the pin. Whispers slithered through the halls of the barracks. Wait, he was a what? Medal of Honor, are you sure? That guy, the janitor. By sunrise, Joe's name was on every tongue, but none of them could say it without stumbling. Riley didn't show up to morning drill, not because he was late, because he couldn't walk into the yard without feeling like a fraud. He sat at the edge of the field, eyes on the barracks wall, watching a flag flutter in silence. The same one Joe used to adjust every morning without fail. A small tug, a straightening of fabric, a ritual no one noticed until now. During chow, Avery stood in front of the platoon. I wasn't going to say anything, he began, but now that everyone's heard the name, he held up a copy of the declassified citation. This is Joseph, Imture Taylor, Sergeant First Class, Special Recon, Vietnam. He paused, then continued. He carried 4 men out of enemy fire, refused evacuation, ran back into the jungle alone to retrieve a pilot, and came out dragging both him and his flight. Recorder. Silence. He didn't talk about it. He scrubbed our floors instead. Later that evening, Base Commander Colburn stood alone in his office. He held a printed version of the citation, redacted years ago, released now by accident, or maybe fate. Joe had worked under his nose for nearly 8 years. No ceremony, no ID flag, just a maintenance number on a dusty time card. Colburn picked up the phone, called the public relations officer. We're not hiding this anymore, he said. Sir, with all due respect, he didn't want attention. Colburn nodded. Then we won't give him a spotlight. We'll give him back his name. That night, Riley walked alone into the infirmary. No one stopped him. Joe lay in bed, IV in his arm, machines quietly clicking. The room smelled like antiseptic and regret. Riley stood at the foot of the bed. He didn't speak right away. Then, barely above, a whisper. I mocked you, I called you names. I thought you were nobody. Joe didn't open his eyes. But he moved his fingers, just a little, toward his chest. Riley reached down and gently pulled the blanket aside. There it was, pinned to his faded undershirt. The medal. And Riley saluted. Joe's condition stabilized overnight. Doctors called, It a minor cardiac episode, brought on by exhaustion, age, and years of work no one noticed. But for the recruits, it was more than a health scare. It was a reckoning. The man they had walked past for months was the reason many of their fathers even came home. Riley sat outside the infirmary every day, didn't eat much, didn't talk, just waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. An apology, maybe, or forgiveness, or maybe just the chance to earn the silence back. In the commander's office, Colburn reviewed Joe's record again. 3 deployments, wounded twice, decorated 6 times, never requested benefits, never asked for reassignment, never even listed a next of kin. It was as if, after 1982, Joe disappeared, not from the world, but from identity. Colburn sighed. He had served for 25 years, but in all that time, he had never seen a man with so much weight and so little need for attention. At Friday morning assembly, Colburn surprised the recruits. He stepped up without script. No podium, just a photo of Joe, young, proud, caked in battlefield smoke. "You've all heard by now," he began. "The man you called Janitor was once called Hero. But let me be clear, he never wanted that title." He paused. "He didn't fight for medals. He fought for the man next to him, and then he came back here to sweep floors in the place that once taught him everything." His voice cracked, and somehow he kept teaching us, without saying a word. That afternoon, Joe awoke. Avery was there. Riley too, eyes low, hands clenched behind his back. Joe looked at them both. Avery spoke first. "They know now, sir." Joe blinked, then muttered, "Guess the mop can't clean everything." Riley stepped forward. "I disrespected you. I disrespected what you stood for." Joe studied him. Not coldly, not cruelly. He simply said, "Son, I've buried men better than both of us. Respect isn't what you say, it's what you fix." Riley nodded, tears stinging, throat closed. "I want to fix it." That evening, as the sun set over the base, the recruits lined up outside Hangar 3. No music, no flags, no cameras. One by one they filed in. Each holding a patch, a pin, or a folded letter. They placed them in a small wooden box at the center of the hangar floor, a tribute to the man who had never asked for anything, and had given everything. And when Joe was wheeled in by Avery, he looked up, saw the crowd, and said nothing, just a single nod, then a tear. A week later, Joe returned to work, not to mop, not to clean, but to speak. Commander Colburn had asked him to address the recruits, just. Once at first, Joe refused, said words never helped anyone in the mud, but something in Riley's eyes, earnest, bruised by guilt, made him pause. So one evening, under soft yellow lights in the hangar classroom, Joe sat in a metal chair, recruits lined up like students. At the edge of reverence, and for the first time in decades, he began. "I was 23 when I earned that ribbon," Joe said, "but I wasn't brave. I was scared, every minute." He paused, rubbed his thumb across the table. "They gave me that medal for saving 4 men, but no one gave me anything for losing 6 before them." The room held its breath. "I learned something in those jungles. That silence keeps the pain from spilling out. But sometimes silence turns into a wall, and eventually you forget who's behind it." Avery raised his hand, carefully, respectfully. "Why come back, sir? Why return here as a janitor?" Joe chuckled. "Not bitter, just tired. Because out there I had no control. The wind took what it wanted. Here I could clean something, fix something, finish something." He looked around the room. "And because I thought, maybe if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would ask the right question." He smiled. "You just did." Riley stood at the back of the room. He hadn't spoken since that night in the infirmary, but now his voice was steady. "Sir, if it's not out of line, can I carry your mop for a week?" Laughter broke softly through the room. But Joe didn't laugh, he nodded. "That's a good start." From that day on, Riley showed up early, shadowed Joe through the quiet corridors, pushed the mop, took the calls, cleaned the grime, and in the process, he cleaned something inside himself. One morning, Riley found something in his locker. No tag, no note, just a folded patch, Joe's old unit insignia. Hand-stitched, faded. Pinned to it was a small piece of masking tape. One word written in block letters, ready. That night, Riley left a note on Joe's bench. "Thank you for letting me unlearn my pride, for letting me earn my silence." Joe never mentioned it, but from that day forward, when Riley walked into a room, he walked like someone who'd met himself. Joe didn't give speeches after that. Didn't need to. His story had planted itself in the barracks, in the chow hall, in the late-night firewatch conversations. You could hear it in the way recruits tied their boots, how they stood a little taller during flag detail, how they looked twice before judging someone by uniform, or lack of it. And every week a new recruit would sit beside Joe at lunch, not to talk, but to listen, because some men carry their authority not on their sleeves, but in the way they sweep a floor. It arrived in the base mailroom like any other envelope, no return address, no fanfare, just a handwritten label, Joseph M. Taylor, Naval Training Facility 42. Avery found it during duty shift. He recognized the name instantly, not as the man who mopped floors, but as the man who rebuilt the spirit of their unit. He delivered it personally, quietly. Joe opened it with steady hands, old but not weak. Inside, a letter, a photograph, a memory that had never truly left. The letter was from a woman named Lily Hartwell. "Dear Mr. Taylor, my father, Latour Marcus Hartwell, was one of the men you carried from the jungle in 1971. I never met him. He died from his wounds days later. But he lived long enough to write my mother one final letter. In it, he wrote, 'If not for one quiet man who refused to leave me behind, you would be receiving a flag instead of a message.'" Joe read the words again, and then he quietly wept. Not loudly, just a single tear sliding down a face lined with years of endurance. Lily had enclosed a photo, a picture of her standing at her father's grave, holding a newborn baby in her arms. "I named my son after you," the note read. "Joseph Marcus Hartwell, I thought you should know. Part of you lived on." Joe traced the edge of the image with his thumb. 1,000 missions had blurred in his mind, but that one, that day, he remembered everything, the screaming, the fire, the refusal to quit. And now, a baby, named after the moment he stayed. Avery and Riley suggested something simple, a display, in case, nothing grand, just a glass box beside the hangar's entry. Inside it they placed a copy of Joe's Medal of Honor citation, a photo of the 1971 recovery Lily's letter, and one worn mop handle, cut clean, polished like a relic above it, a brass plaque. "To the man who cleaned more than floors, who carried more than weight, who left no one behind." Joe didn't ask for it, but he didn't stop it either. Weeks later, a civilian van pulled up outside the base. A young woman stepped out, holding a boy with big eyes and a curious stare. It was Lily, and the child, no older than 6, looked around like he had stepped into a movie set. Avery, now leading orientation, greeted her at the gate. She asked one question: "Is he still here?" They found Joe in the corner of the hangar, tightening the wheel bolts of a rusted display cart. He looked up as Lily approached. Didn't recognize her at first, but when she handed him the photograph again, he knew. "You look like your father," he said, voice warm. "I never got to meet him," she replied, "but I've spent my life trying to find the man who brought him home." She knelt beside Joe, placing her son gently on the floor. "This," she whispered, "is Joseph, and I told him before we came here that he was named after a man who didn't leave people behind." A week after Lily's visit, a letter arrived, not handwritten this time, but sealed with a gold crest. National Medal of Honor Foundation. Inside, an invitation, a televised event, anniversary gala, heroes from every branch, medals gleaming under spotlights. A seat saved for Joseph M. Taylor. Avery read the letter aloud in the break room. Joe sat silently, staring at the floor. "They want you there, sir," Riley said gently. "People want to know your story." Joe shook his head. "My story ain't. And for a stage." Avery leaned in. "Maybe not for you, sir, but maybe for everyone else who never came home." That night, Joe sat alone in his room. The invitation sat on the table beside his coffee, still unopened, still untouched. He stared at his old boots in the corner, laces worn, soles smoothed by decades of service no one saw. He had fought for silence, earned peace through invisibility. But now, the silence had turned into something else, a vacuum, one filled with voices of recruits, young and uncertain, of families waiting for someone to carry their story forward. Joe opened an old footlocker beneath his bed. Inside, a reel-to-reel recorder, dusty, untouched since '85. He popped in the only remaining tape, pressed play. A younger voice crackled to life, his own. "If anyone ever hears this, I didn't do it to be known. But if it helps you find courage in the shadows, then speak, tell them. But don't wear my name like a badge. Wear it like a reminder." Joe sat still, eyes moist, hands steady. He picked up the invitation and folded it carefully into his pocket. They found his old dress, blues, tucked in a back closet of the maintenance locker. Riley volunteered to clean it. Avery offered to press it, but Joe said, "I'll wear it as it is." No one honors a uniform by polishing it. They honor it by surviving inside it. So he stood in front of the mirror, wrinkles on his face mirroring the creases on the jacket. Medals still glinting, shoulders still squared, and for the first time in decades he saluted his own reflection. The day of the event arrived. Joe entered the gala without fanfare. No entourage, no cameras following, but when the announcer spoke his name, Sergeant First Class Joseph M. Taylor, the entire room stood. 4-star generals, congressmen, veterans with canes, medals heavy on their chests. Even the president rose. But Joe didn't walk to the podium. He walked to the last row, where Lily sat with young Joseph in her lap. He placed his hand on the child's shoulder, then turned to the room. Joe cleared his throat. "I don't like stages. Never have." Laughter rippled gently. "I didn't come here to talk about war. I came to talk about work." He lifted his old cap. "The kind that happens after the war's over. The kind that cleans up messes people pretend they don't see. The kind that happens when you mop a hallway and hope someone learns from the sound of your footsteps." He looked at Lily. "This medal doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the ones who didn't come back, and to the ones who will, because of what we teach them now." The gala ended. Photos were taken. Applause echoed. Medals flashed beneath bright lights. But when Joe returned to Naval Facility 42, nothing about him had changed, except everything. He still wore the same windbreaker, still pushed the same mop, still showed up before the sun. But now, when he entered the corridor, recruits stood. Not because they were told to, but because they felt it. Respect was no longer about rules. It was about recognition. 1 week later, Riley requested something unusual. At the end of basic, before recruits graduated, he wanted to add a new step. Not a speech, not a drill, just one walk. Down the west corridor, past the janitor's closet, where Joe always began his shift, each graduating class would place their name in a book, not a military log. The quiet ledger, they called it, and next to each name, one sentence. "Because of those who stayed behind." Joe said nothing when he saw it, but he sat beside the book every Friday, just watching, just witnessing. One morning, Joe handed Avery a key, old, rusted, marked with faint lettering. "What's this?" Avery asked. Joe's voice was low. "Back closet in hangar 1. There's a box." It's time it came out. Inside the closet was a steel container, dust-covered, tucked beneath coils of forgotten wiring. They opened it slowly. Inside, a folded American flag, a stack of letters never sent, and a journal labeled Recovery, 1971, 1976. The first line read, "For the ones I couldn't carry back." Riley and Avery proposed turning the box into a display, but Joe interrupted. "Not a display," he said. "A conversation." So they built a small room beside the training barracks. Inside, a bench, a wall with excerpts from Joe's journal, a looped audio of his voice, reading passages softly, and a space for recruits to leave notes, questions, thanks. They called it the Room of the Carried. No one entered without silence. No one left without something changed. It happened 2 months later. A new recruit named Sanchez sat inside the room for almost an hour, then stood, faced the wall, and said aloud, "I used to think I had to earn my family's respect by being loud, but now I know the strongest ones don't shout, they stay." Joe watched from the corner. He didn't say a word. He just nodded once. And in that nod, Sanchez found more mentorship than any boot camp ever gave him. That year, the Navy promoted 4 officers to admiral, held 3 retirement ceremonies, deployed 5 new squadrons. But the most talked about change, a simple shift in protocol. Every new recruit now receives a folded slip of paper in their welcome kit. One quote, one line, no name attached. The loudest leaders are often forgotten. The quiet ones are never replaced. Everyone knew who it came from. No one needed to say it. Joe never missed a shift. He arrived each morning before the mess hall opened, before the first boot hit the gravel, before even the birds decided to sing. One morning, Avery waited outside the janitor's room to surprise him with coffee. But Joe didn't come. An hour passed. Then 2. The hallway felt off. Too still. Like a breath waiting to be released. Avery knocked once, twice, no answer. He opened the door. Inside, folded neatly on the cot, Joe's jacket, his mop handle, and his Medal of Honor. But no Joe. Joe had left a letter on the pillow. "It's time. My legs are tired, but my spirit is clean. Don't call it retirement. Don't call it a farewell. Call it a passing of the mop. Keep the halls clean. Keep the hearts cleaner." Joe. There were no tears at first. Just silence. The kind that doesn't feel empty, but sacred. That afternoon, Commander Colburn issued an order, all drills suspended, all formations redirected. Instead, every active recruit, over 1,000, marched once through Corridor 9. Each carried a cleaning cloth, a single mop swipe, a symbolic gesture for the man who kept their path clean long before they walked. By the end of the march, the floor shone so bright you could see your own reflection, and in it, they saw his. The quiet ledger was full. Page after page of names, words of thanks, moments of change. At the very end, one final note appeared, written in ink that bled a little. No name, no rank. "I wasn't supposed to lead. I was supposed to serve. But sometimes, if you serve long enough, people start to follow." Riley framed that page, mounted it just above the room of the carried. Visitors touch it now like a relic, like the first step to understanding. The base appointed a new maintenance chief, a young woman named Sergeant Ellis, quiet, sharp, former aircraft tech. When asked if she wanted a ceremony, she said, "I'll take the closet with the view of the flag." Her first day, she walked into the supply room and found the mop handle Joe left. She didn't hang it up. She didn't retire it. She used it every morning since, before sunrise, before first call. The sound of that same mop echoes down the hall, and somewhere you can almost hear him walking beside it. It had been 2 decades since Joe left. The base had changed. New walls, new tech. But some things never moved. The quiet ledger still rested on its pedestal. The room of the carriage still whispered stories through low-lit speakers. And every Friday, just before sundown, new recruits still walked the hall with cloth in hand, one final lesson before they earned their title. That week, recruit Malik Thompson arrived, fresh out of Detroit, hot-headed, quick-talking, eager to prove himself. But underneath, a storm. The kind that hadn't found a place to land yet. Malik got assigned to corridor cleaning duty. He grumbled, "What is this? I came to shoot, not scrub." Avery, now senior officer, heard him, smiled. "Don't worry, Thompson, you're not the first to say that." "But take this," he said, handing him a book, The Quiet Ledger. Malik opened it, skimmed pages, saw name after name. Some written in nervous pen, others in tight, proud script. Then he saw it, the last entry underlined in fading ink. "I wasn't supposed to lead. I was supposed to serve. But sometimes, if you serve long enough, people start to follow." He stared at the signature. There was none. That night, Malik slipped into the tribute room. The benches were empty. The audio hummed softly. Joe's voice, calm, crackling through age, read passages from his old journal. "I spent most of my years thinking quiet meant forgotten. But it doesn't. Quiet just means you're working without asking the world to clap." Malik didn't know why, but tears came, soft, sudden, honest. He left a note in the box by the bench. "I never met you, but somehow you met me." The next morning, the janitor cart rolled again, but this time it was Malik, volunteering, no punishment, no instruction, just a choice. He pushed the mop down the west corridor, where sunlight always hit the tile just right. And as he moved, other recruits watched, curious. One of them, confused, asked, "Why are you doing that, man?" Malik looked up, smiled, "Because somebody did it for me before I even knew I needed it." Years later, Malik became a senior instructor. He stood in front of a fresh class of recruits, same hanger, same dusty mic, same nervous eyes staring back. He didn't say much, just this: "There was a man here once. You'd never know him from his clothes. You might have walked past him, I almost did. But his silence built a bridge the rest of us now walk across. If you remember one thing, don't wait to lead loud. Learn to serve quiet." And with that, he placed Joe's mop, framed and mounted, on the wall behind him. At Naval Facility 42, there's no statue of Joe, no national monument, no parade. But every recruit who walks those halls knows how to carry weight without shouting, how to respect before questioning, and how to lead without ever needing a nameplate. Because somewhere in the shadow of every strong leader is a janitor, who taught them how to stand still long enough to become one, and that is the loudest silence the Navy ever heard. Please subscribe for more such content. Thank you.